In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can use just one light to create awesome product photos just like these. So I'm in the studio today and I'm shooting something pretty cool. It's the Cyberpunk 2077 edition of the OnePlus 8T phone. This phone is very limited edition, so I am really pleased to be able to get this in for CNET. As such, I want to really make a splash with the images I create to make my coverage really stand out. But that doesn't mean using some hugely complicated setup to get these shots. Let's take a look at what I've got set up. So as I say, this is a one light setup, and that one light is an Interfit LED mono light. Now I've got a big softbox on the front, and that's going to turn this small light source into a much bigger one, which is going to make our product look even nicer. I'm using a big roll of blue paper as my background. Now I think that with a bit of tweaking in Lightroom, this color is going to contrast really nicely with the splashes of yellow on the phone itself. That sort of thing is really important to think about if you want to take really great product photography. Don't just put your product anywhere in the scene and then take your shot, but instead think about how the colors of the product itself can be complemented by the colors that you've got in your scene. That extra bit of thought and planning at this stage will make a huge difference to your finished shot. The phone is sitting on a piece of black Perspex. Now I specifically used a glossy piece as I want it to be dark, but also, as you can see, it reflects a lot of the blue background and of course reflects the phone itself, which gives a really interesting look. You can see how different this shot looks if I'd have just used a regular piece of black card. So instead, having this lovely reflection here of the phone and the reflection of that blue is really helping bring this whole shot together. So it is a dead simple setup, and clearly you don't need huge amounts of props and staging in order to put this together. All I've really got is a piece of black Perspex, a piece of blue paper and one light. Really couldn't be more simple. If you've ever considered trying to make some money with your photography with things like this at home, then this is something that's really worth keeping in mind. You can probably quite easily have a setup just like this that you can throw together in your living room, start doing shots for local companies like jewelers or local craft breweries. All those kinds of companies will need their own imagery, and having setups like this means you can very quickly create some really eye-catching shots. So let's actually dive in and take a look at the first shot that I'm going to be getting. So I've switched over to my 5D, which is what I'll be using to actually take the shots. And this first shot is very much what I would consider the main hero shot of the phone. We can see all of it, it's very clear, and it's the sort of shot that you'd use to really illustrate an article about this phone. As you can see, we've got this great reflection which gives this whole look a very sort of clean, modern look. This yellow of the Cyberpunk logo and down here contrasts really nicely with the blue, and because we've got this light just over to the left, just out of frame here, it's lighting the phone up really nicely. In fact, if I zoom out all the way, we can see exactly where that light is. And one of the benefits of using LED lights rather than strobes with product photography is that you can see exactly where that light is falling without having to take a photo first. So as you can see, as we move this light around, we get a very different lighting effect on the phone. Those reflections change, and we can also control the amount of light falling on the background. If I zoom back in on the phone itself, and we can see just how that light is changing as we move it around, we can see that we can get very different effects. This way it's lighting more of the background and the phone itself is falling a bit more into shadow. We don't want that. So moving it in so that we're getting more light on the phone. And it really is just about fine-tuning that positioning until we get it into a space where I'm pretty happy. I actually think something like this looks pretty good. The phone is nicely lit. I can see all the details on this bit of the phone. This looks really nice. This is sort of quite metallic, so it's catching the light coming in really nicely, and I think it stands out very well from the background. Before I go any further and actually take the shot, there is something very important, and that is to clean this surface, because this is, we want it to be nice and reflective, but you might just be able to see that there is a lot of dust and cat hair and all this other sort of detritus hanging around, which I'm only going to have to remove in Photoshop. Now, I'm not going to be able to get rid of all of it, but if I can get rid of as much as possible at this point, it's going to save me a lot of Photoshop time later. So I'm just going to give it a wipe down with a microfiber cloth. I've already cleaned the phone. Again, if you're taking product photos, make sure your actual product is clean. So now we've got a clean base, it's time to actually take the shot. You can see that I've got the phone set up pretty much in the middle of the frame. Now that's in order to leave plenty of space around it for the website and promo teams to crop it in different ways. They may want to crop it so that the phone's more on the left or more on the right. We could also have lots of space to put text around it if that's what we needed. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm in focus. So I'm going to focus on this top of the bit of the phone, and it isn't. Always do this manually, don't trust autofocus, because it may be that the autofocus tries to focus at the bottom of the phone and then the top where kind of the logo and the camera is, isn't in focus, whereas we can see here everything is nice and pin sharp. So I'm shooting at let's actually go with f8. That's going to give the maximum sharpness with this lens. And I want it to be a little bit underexposed because I want to make sure that that blue background isn't getting too blown out. So at this point, I'm using 25th of a second shutter speed. My ISO is the lowest it can be, which is ISO 100. So I think at this point, I'm ready to take the shot. But because this is quite a slow shutter speed, I don't want any wobble from the camera to blur the image. I'm going to use a 2-second timer. Now what that means is that I can take this, I can tell it to start taking the shot, and then it's got 2 seconds for any wobble from me touching the screen just to stop, and hopefully then we should get a much sharper shot. What I'll do at this point, once I've got a nice setup, is just slightly move my camera around, try a few different variations on that, maybe getting it a bit lower down to emphasize that reflection even more. Because once I've got my light in place, I don't really need to change anything. I don't need to change my settings, but I just can move the camera around and make sure that I've got every type of shot that I might want. I always find it's good practice to take more shots than you think you might need, because then you've got options down the line. If you're taking a photo of this phone and then you sent the phone back and then found you needed a particular angle that you didn't get, and you're kind of stuffed. So it's best to make sure that you're getting everything when you've actually got the product set up right here. So for this next shot, I've actually laid the phone flat on the black perspex, and I've moved the light a little bit up, but so it's pointing more at the blue background. Now the reason for this, if we just pop live view back on my camera, so as you can see in here, we get this really nice soft light, and it looks like we've got lovely soft light on the surface. But what this actually is, of course, is the reflection of that blue background. So we get gorgeous light, gorgeous colors, but it's a really, really subtle, very sort of modern, stylish shot. And I think it's going to suit this phone really, really well. So just as before, I'm going to be manually focusing, but I think the issue that I'm going to have is that now the phone's lying down, the top of the phone is quite a bit further away relatively from the camera, from the bottom of the phone. And I'm a bit worried that I'm not going to get everything nice and sharp in one image. So for example, if I zoomed in and I'm manually focused on the Cyberpunk logo down here, zoom back out, it's a darker image now, so I'm going to have to reduce my shutter speed to a 15th of a second, maybe even a bit more. I am still, as you can see, underexposing from what the camera thinks is right. But I'm just going to take this shot, and then I'm going to zoom in on that shot, and I can see that, yeah, the Cyberpunk logo is nice and sharp, but as I move up the phone, the camera unit up here, this text, is not sharp, it's out of focus. So what I'm going to have to do is take multiple shots, focusing in different points across the phone, and then blend those together in Photoshop to make sure that everything is nice and sharp. So let's start off. Let's focus on the very bottom edge, and then we're going to just move up, focusing on different elements of the phone as we go.
Do, speeding up the process.
And then finally, I'm focusing on that top edge. As you can maybe see, right down here is very much out of focus, but it is pin sharp in that top corner. And that should hopefully give us all the information we need to blend that into one nice sharp shot. So I do like this shot, but I just think it could be a little bit better. And I think what I'm going to do is just raise the back of the phone up very basically. In fact, how I'm going to do it is just with this little ring that I've got. I've just placed that under the phone, but now we've got a very different way the shadow is falling, and it just brings this to life a little bit more. So if we just take a look at how that looks on the back of camera, you can see how much of a difference it's made. It's suddenly a more dynamic shot. If we look before, it's just kind of flat on the table and it looks great, but I do just think that this suddenly comes to life. What I do want to do is adjust where my light is though, because if I just take a quick photo, there we go. You can see down here in the bottom of the phone that we've got a very, very bright light. It's directly reflecting the light right above it, and it's just too white and we're losing a lot of that detail. So go back into live view and I can just tweak that positioning to something, I think, like this. Product photography is very much about fine-tuning. It's about tiny movements. Centimeters of movement can make a huge amount of difference to the shot you're taking. In this case, I've moved the light maybe an inch, but it's made a huge change to the way that the light is falling on the phone down here. Again, I'm going to need to blend my focus points here because it is not going to be sharp all the way across. So let's do this very quickly. Let's start off with shooting the bottom edge, get our shot, and we can then move our way again up the phone. Speed, speed, speed it up so it's not too dull. So I'm really happy with how this shot has come out. It looks great on the back of camera, so I think it's probably time we take this over into Photoshop and see what we can turn it into. So here we are in Lightroom. These are the shots that we've got so far. We can see how they've come out. Everything's looking pretty glossy and nice. So these are the ones that we did when the phone was laying flat on the surface, and I do think these look really nice, but it is the ones when I've raised the phone up that I think are the best ones, and these are the ones that I'm going to take you through some of the processing. So the thing to start is to blend those focus points together, because if we just take a quick look down here, we can see that Cyberpunk 2077 is pin sharp. As we go further up the phone, it's not. It's completely blurred. That's not good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these ones that I did the focus stack with, right click. Now there are two ways of doing this. You can take this into Photoshop, and Photoshop does have its own focus stack software. However, I don't think it does a very good job, and so when I'm doing shots that I need to be really, really high quality for professional use, I use a piece of software called Helicon Focus now, which is specifically designed to do exactly this, and I find that it's much more accurate. So right click on these, edit in Helicon Focus. It's a very easy piece of software. You can see that all of those different shots are stacked up down here. So I'm just going to click the render button, and it's going to take me through this stacking process. And straight away, we can pretty much see that it is nice and sharp. If we go and have a little look in down here, that's nice and sharp. And then down here is also nice and sharp. It's done a good job. So here is now a really good base image that's nice and sharp from the bottom, oops, all the way to the top, looking good. So we can actually start doing some proper edits. So the first thing that I always do in this shot is just do some cleanup. Now you saw that I did get that cloth and try and wipe away as lots of the dust and hairs and things that were on the surface. But now we're in Photoshop and we can look in. Look, there is a lot of stuff left over, and a big old hair, probably from my cat. Yeah, lots and lots of bits. So I'm going to have to spend a little bit of time going through and cleaning everything up. Now, thankfully, it's a very, very simple process in Photoshop. I do it almost entirely just with the spot removal tool. I can just bring that up, quite a large brush, and just click on top of all the dust and it goes away. So I'm going to speed this up and go through this process now. So one of the things that actually can be quite helpful if you're doing this, because it's getting a little bit dark down here and I can't quite see everything that I'm doing, particularly not when I've actually got the big LED light lighting me up for this video. It's one you can do is use an adjustment, maybe say levels, really bring that brightness up, darken it down, upping the contrast hugely. So now we can see very clearly where all this dust and stuff is. If we turn that off, it's difficult to see. Turn it on, you can see all of it. But it's only there just so we can make it a bit more visible. We can just turn that layer off afterwards and it won't be making any difference to our photo. So let's crack back on. Well, of course I'm speeding up this bit. It takes forever and you do not want to just sit for what was probably about half an hour while I click around the screen, removing every single little tiny bit of dust I could find. No. Okay, so I'm pretty confident that I've done a really decent cleanup of the background. So now I'm going to do the same and clean up any small dust spots that I can see on the phone. I'm going to have to use a smaller brush size with the spot removal tool. And I'm going around looking for any bits of dust. Now, this back pattern, I don't want to accidentally remove that thinking that it's dust. So I'm looking for like this, any little bit of hair and anything that looks particularly out of place. But obviously things like that is part of the pattern, so don't want to get rid of that. All of this though, that can go. Dot, 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 dot. This does take a long time. It's very boring, but it is worth spending your time doing it now because it is one of the things that's going to make your shot look a lot more professional if you've got a really clean image. Nothing ruins a good shot more than if you can just see that there's lots of dust and dirt which hasn't been removed. So spend the time doing it at this point and then don't worry about it later. It's not just dust as well. We've got little sort of extra catch lights on here, which I don't want. This is probably a reflection of the regular light in this room. I want to try and get rid of that. Get rid of this. So we don't want those lights. This is going to be a little bit more difficult to get rid of. Instead, I'm going to use the clone stamp tool. I'm going to take a reading over here, reduce this brush size, and then I'm going to paint this in like that, which pretty much got rid of it. Then actually I think I'm just going to have to paint with a small brush that bit of black in on that edge, and there we go. That's just got rid of that. Look, before and after, just got rid of that little harsh pinpoint of light which we didn't want. Again, I'm going to keep on moving around. A little bit of a fingerprint here. Again, we can do a similar thing, clone stamp over here, and we can just paint that away. Very easy to do. And then we've got the same thing here in that we've got these little bits of catch light. We want to get rid of those. Other little bits of dust, see to those, just make sure that everything's nice and smooth and even. If you need to do a smaller dot, then you can reduce the brush size and just put it in like that. Okay, I think we're getting there. As you can see, it's time consuming. Okay, here is a little example that the software hasn't fully merged that focus point quite as well as it should have done. I certainly don't think this is a big enough deal to ruin this image. What is a bit worse is that we have got these errors here that I can see, in that there's this sort of black splotchiness where it hasn't quite figured out what should be in focus and what isn't. Now, it's not much of a big deal because if you remember, we've still got this levels adjustment on so we can see things. If I turn that off, then you can't really tell that there's anything wrong at all. And certainly if we look at that full screen, you can't see it. It's really not a problem. So I don't think I'm going to worry about that too much. The only thing that I can see is that we have got some of these errors. And again, we're at basically a pixel level of detail here. It's not a big deal, but I am just going to try and clean up some of these errors. And I'm going to do that with the clone stamp tool. I'm going to use a smaller brush size, something around 7%. I'm going to take a sample from just here and then paint that in on here. And I'm going to do the same on some of these other spots as well. It's going to be, again, a little bit time consuming, but I think I just feel a bit happier knowing that I've done it. This is the last bit of speedy up because this is also boring, but it's important, and I couldn't be bothered thinking of anything better to do in my voiceover except complain about speeding things up. So it's certainly not perfect. I really should have paid more attention to this when I first did that focus blend. But if we have a look before I've made any corrections, we can see just kind of how messy and just unclean these lines are before, and then I've managed to kind of bring it back in, strengthen those lines, and just done what I can at this point to clean it up. If I spent another hour or so, I could probably get this a lot better, but just for the sake of time right now, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm pretty happy with how that looks generally. And there's our shot. Let's get rid of that. No, let's keep that on for a moment because we can see how clean that background is now. And if we turn that off, we can see that there's all this dust and stuff everywhere. Now we've got a much cleaner shot. A really, really great place to start. So first of all, I can just get rid of that levels layer. We don't need that. And I'm going to duplicate this background just so that we can go back and play around as much as we need to. For the most part, I'm going to edit this using the camera raw filter because that gives you the same controls pretty much that you would find in Lightroom. So it's a really, really nice way of editing your shots with familiar controls inside Photoshop. I want to increase that exposure. I want to maybe play with the shadows, up those just a little bit. What are those highlights doing? If you bring the highlights down, but the whites up, it's going to give it a bit more pop. I think that's looking pretty nice. I'm going to leave my white balance exactly as it was because I think that's looking pretty good. But what I am going to do is go into the color mixer. And I want to play around with some of these colors a little bit. I know that I want to take this blue and make it a little bit more cyan than it is because I think that's going to pop really nicely against that yellow color that we've got in the Cyberpunk logo. So I'm going to bring this down to maybe minus... around there, minus thing. And obviously we've probably got some cyan, some aquas in there as well. So I'm going to bring those down to, what were they? Bring that down to minus 17. I might also slightly desaturate those aquas just a little bit. The yellow is a little bit too greeny yellow. It needed to be a bit more vibrant. So I'm going to bring that down as well a little bit in the hue. I'm also going to increase that saturation so it really pops out. Something like that I think looks pretty cool. That's all I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to press OK and we can see straight away it's made a huge difference to our shot. But the next thing I'm going to do is I want to take away some of this blue from the phone itself because it's reflecting a lot of that blue background. And this isn't blue. This phone is grey on the back, but with just those yellow points of detail around. So the way I'm going to do that is by using the pen tool and basically cutting the phone out from its background. So to do that, I'm just going to grab the pen tool, and it can be fairly rough with this because wherever it's black, it isn't being you're not going to see anything. But for the rest of the phone, I need to be fairly accurate. So okay, and then we can right click, make selection, feather by 1 pixel, and there we go. So now I can go to adjustments, hue and saturation, and it will automatically fill that with a mask, meaning that whatever we change is only affecting the phone, not the background, which is great. So I don't want to bring down the saturation of everything. I want to bring down the blues. In fact, do we even really have any blues? Maybe it's not in the blue channel. It's probably in the cyans channel. And indeed, yes. Okay, that's where most of it is. So I want to bring that down quite a lot. I'm also going to use this opportunity to lighten it up. The greens, are there any greens in here? There's a little bit in those. Yep. So I'm not going to touch the saturation. I am going to touch the hue. In fact, if we increase that saturation, we can see that it's quite green around here. But by bringing that hue down, we can turn it more into yellow, which is what it should be. And then bring that saturation back. I'm still going to drop it a little bit. So there we go. Now the phone is showing its true colors, gray and black. But we've still got those nice yellows from the Cyberpunk logo in there. The problem is, with the logo down in the bottom, it's so bright, but it's been washed out a little bit. And I want to fix that, and I've got a very, very easy way of doing it. We're going to create a new layer, an empty layer, and I'm going to take my eyedropper tool and take a nice sample of one of the deep yellows, like this one. And then, paintbrush, decent flow, decent size, and just paint over the top. Just like this on our logo. There we go. Doesn't that look much better? Zoom out, see what it's like. I think that's looking really good. Except, of course, it's not. This is awful. The great thing is using blending modes, and you'll see that magically we're just going to make that fit in perfectly. And as we go down our darken blending mode, look at that. It's taken it from paint everywhere on everything, and then it's just putting it where we want it to. And in fact, the multiply one works even better. You know, you can see how they all change how it looks. We could change it to white and blue, but we're not doing that. Multiply is what we're going for. But you can still see there is still some yellow color cast around here, but that as well is very easily taken care of. If we double click on the layer thumbnail, we can bring up the blending modes, blending options rather, and this one, blend if. And this basically says that if the underlying layer is dark, we don't want it to blend. In this case, the underlying layer is dark. It's the phone. So I can grab this down here, start to bring it up. And as I do, you'll see this yellow disappear from the background. Look at that. There it is. And then suddenly it's no longer there. If we just press OK, zoom out, look at that. Suddenly we've got this beautiful, vibrant Cyberpunk logo, exactly as it should be. But it isn't anywhere. And all I did is just scribble over the top with the paintbrush. And yet, using blending modes, it's perfectly put it into position. It's such a quick way of working. So if we turn that off, you can see without it, this is overexposed. It's reflecting that light, so it looks very, very desaturated. There's not much yellow in there, yet it really should be. It should be vivid yellow. And now it is. Simple, and it only took us a couple of minutes. I don't think there's much more that I really want to do with this shot. I really like how it looks. Maybe try playing around with the levels just a little bit, giving it a bit more boost, a bit extra contrast, something like that. Looks pretty good. But for the most part, I think that looks really, really nice. It stands out from the screen a lot. I'm really happy. One thing I might just try, actually, before we finish though, is I might just do the same with this. I might get that paintbrush back, and we don't need to change anything because we've already got those blending modes applied, and I can just paint over. Yeah, let's do this. The paint over this part of the phone as well, which is supposed to be exactly the same yellow, and clearly isn't. What we've actually got is a very washed out yellow, which isn't ideal. So we can paint back over this, bring that color screaming back into view, just like that. And because we use those blending modes, they're already applied to that layer. I haven't had to do anything else. I can just paint and we're done. And straight away that pops out so much more. Let's turn that layer off. That looks pretty weak. Could almost be white that sort of caught a bit of yellow background light. Now actually it's exactly as it should be. Vibrant, vivid yellow. It looks awesome. So I think that's going to bring me to an end. I really hope that it's been useful to see how I would go about setting up, taking, and then editing this sort of shot. It really is a great way of working just with one light and playing around with your background. It can be quick and it can be very, very straightforward. So great if you're just getting started with product photography. But you can get shots that look really professional and really slick. So yeah, if you have enjoyed this video, please do hit that like button, subscribe if you don't already, and I will see you next time.